co-authors about their latest work.
Linda Sarsour, co-founder and co-organizer of the Women's March, co-author of this incredible new book, Together We Rise, Behind the Scenes of the Protest Heard Around the World. On January 21st, it'll be the year anniversary of the largest protest in American history. How did you get involved? Take us back to the moment when you first decided that you could do this.
I was just like everybody else. I had a couple of minutes of despair after the November election in 2016 and was sitting online just like everybody else trying to figure out, analyze with folks, why are we in this situation? And I started seeing posts and Facebook events about this, Million Women March. And I was like, my first instinct was to be like, there was already a Million Women March and it was organized by Black women in 1997, but I digress. Yeah. And I started going into the actual pages to see the commentary and what conversations people were having. And I actually said, I made a comment in there and I said, I hope that you include Muslim women and Muslim communities because it was one of the groups that actually was not described in the description of the event. They talked about solidarity with other groups, but Muslims were not included. And I'm sure it wasn't intentionally, but I felt the need to say something. And at the same time, simultaneously, as I was making that comment, Bob Bland, who is one of the original founders of that kind of Facebook page, was already in conversation with Tamika Mallory, who's an African-American civil rights leader, and Carmen Perez, who's a Chicana woman who has been working on criminal justice reform here in this country. And they were already in conversation about bringing in women of color. And the minute that I made that commentary, Tamika Mallory was like, oh yeah, we have a third that comes with this trio, and her name is Linda, and she's a Muslim American organizer. And if you're going to bring us in, Linda has to be included in this in this work. And they were like, absolutely. So that's how I joined the Women's March. And originally, when I went to the table, we came with some conditions. We weren't just going to be tokenized in this movement, especially in light of the critiques that this was started by white women. And myself, Carmen, and Tamika didn't want to be tokenized as the one Chicana, as the one Black woman, as the one Muslim woman. And we asked to be co-chairs of the march. We also had very important roles. Tamika Mallory did a lot of assistance around operations. I was the fundraiser. I also worked on the unity principles on the platform that we created. Carmen was in charge of all the beautiful partnerships that you saw manifested on the day and beyond that day. And it was a lot of work, and it was something we had to think about whether we had the fortitude and the resources to engage in that. But it happened, and it was amazing, hard but amazing.
Happened, did it ever? Tell us your favorite moment from the Women's March, from the actual day of the Women's March in Washington. What was one of your favorite moments?
Not many people know this story, but about maybe a week and a half before the Women's March actually happened, I was in a hotel room watching MSNBC, and I saw a man by the name of Charlie Brotman, who was the inauguration announcer for about 60 years, and he's done every presidential candidate, both Republican and Democrat. Except when Donald Trump came, he fired him. He didn't want him to be the announcer. And at the same time, Charlie Brotman's wife also died literally in the same period when he was asked not to be the announcer. And I was so moved by that. I was literally in my hotel room bawling my eyes out. I didn't know who this guy was. And I went back home to New York. I went to the Women's March headquarters where all this organizing was happening. I walk in and I say, everybody got to stop. I said, we got to get Charlie Brotman. Everyone's like, who the hell is Charlie Brotman? I was like, he was the, inauguration announcer, and Trump fired him, and his wife died, and he's an old man. He will not end his life in this way. And they were like, look, if you find the guy, bring the guy. And I went on a mission. I contacted every organizer I knew, political operatives that have worked in, White Houses in the past, and I found him. And I brought him to the Women's March, and he was the announcer at the Women's March, which of course was much larger, factually and accurately, than the inauguration. And the most beautiful moment is when he showed up. And here's this man in his 80s who had so much joy in his face, how they're like, I can't explain to you the energy that he walked in with, the gratitude, and especially in such a difficult moment in his life after he just lost his wife and lost his job that he's had for over 60 years. It just gave me so much joy. And it was a very personal moment for me that may not be contextually as part of the larger Women's March, but that moment is going to resonate with me forever.
Oh, that's beautiful. I do remember that story, and I do remember being touched by it. I'm so glad that you took action. And in fact, that idea, the things that touch us all, people like you take action, is so much at the heart of what is the story of this book. So the idea of the book is, you know, many of you were at the march or the sister marches all around the country or in the world, but most of you don't know what it took, what the behind-the-scenes stories are. So tell me some more of those behind-the-scenes stories, what it took to really put on the largest protest that had ever happened in Washington, D.C., similarly in New York City, and then in, if I'm not mistaken, 600 other places across the country and on every continent across the globe.
I mean, that's what's really most important about this book, is that you get to really go behind the scenes and get to hear, you know, the joy, but also the pain and the hard work and the perseverance and the attacks and the critiques and the having to work internally, but with the external forces that were out there. And also what people don't realize is that most of us didn't know each other. So this is not like an established organization that has been around for, you know, 50 years. We've been there, done that. Some of us been there, done that, but most of us have never organized a day in our lives. So me, Tamika, and Carmen walked into a space as seasoned organizers with women who never marched. Women who were yoga teachers, public school teachers, entrepreneurs, bakers, people from tech, who were so moved by this kind of election gone wrong that they were ready to roll up their sleeves and give whatever talents they had. So we were building relationships and getting to know people at the same time that we had to organize this march that had to reinstill hope in people. Like, we had a mission here. What did we want people to feel when they got there on January 21st of 2017? And there was a lot of hard moments that you'll hear about in the book. I mean, here we were, women of color, who had a little resentment in our hearts, organizing with white women, and not specifically or personally towards those particular white women, but just in general, like, oh, welcome. So now you feel directly impacted. Now you're feeling, you know, targeted. Now you're feeling some sort of despair. But we come from communities that felt that for a really long time. You know, and as a Muslim living in a post 9/11 America, I couldn't but help but think in my mind, like, wish you were around, you know, 15 years ago. And obviously, Tamika's a black woman, and we had, of course, other black women, other Latinas, and people who were from LGBTQ communities. And so there was a lot of conversations we had to have. So when we talked about what was it about this march that we were going to be standing for? Oh, yeah, you know, women's rights are human rights, reproductive rights, equal pay. And we were like, ho, that's cool. We're all about reproductive rights and equal pay. But let's have a deeper conversation. Did you know that white women don't get paid the same as men, but black women don't get paid the same as white women? And what about immigrant women who don't get paid the same as black women? So there also had to be an infusion of this idea around race analysis, that these women never had to have a race analysis, or they didn't feel the need to have to talk about race. And we were critiqued very forcefully. This idea of, you know, why were we being divisive? Oh, excuse me, so talking about race is divisive. I said, you know, maybe if we talked about race before, we wouldn't have been in the situation that we got ourselves in. So the book is really a behind the scenes, a truthful account of how you get to the largest single day protest in 10 weeks, how women are questioned every step of the way. I mean, our permit for Washington, D.C. hit the front page of the Washington Post. The fact that people didn't believe that we were capable of getting a permit, which is probably the easiest thing to do when you're organizing a mobilization, and kept on. Like, every media outlet in America called us day in, day out, where's the permit? Are you getting a permit? Until one day I was like, guess what? Even if we don't get a permit, we're still showing up in Washington, D.C. because those are my streets. I pay for those streets, and we're showing up. So there was a lot of that that happened, and it was, you know, through all the, you know, obstacles and the relationship building and, you know, little falling outs that we had here and there. These women are our sisters, and they, you know, have evolved, and it was a great learning opportunity for all of us in this organizing of the Women's March. And when we got there on January 21st, we told MPD, oh yeah, we'll have about 200,000 people here.
What's MPD?
MPD is basically the local police department in the DC area, the Metropolitan Police, and they were like, how many people do you think are going to be here? I was like, oh, I don't know, like 200,000, maybe 250.
Yeah.
If we want to be really impressive. And they were like, that's pretty impressive. But when we got there, about 1 million extra people came, and it was beautiful.
Yeah. It was amazing. And I was at the Women's March in New York with a bunch of friends and my partner, and there was a definite sense that the tent was huge, that the messages were many, but that the spirit was the same, which was one of a sort of fierce love and inclusion. And I was really pleased to see, as a policy person myself, as someone who says, we've got to know what we're fighting for. We've got to know what the vision is, even in these dark, dark moments. I was really pleased to see the Women's March put out a platform in the weeks before the march. And as soon as I saw it, I thought, this is a platform that I can really get behind. This would really transform our country. And this includes some issues that are probably quite unknown to many of the white women who are knitting pussy hats.
Yes.
But whom, in this moment, what a powerful opportunity to educate them. And it's not that they would say no to it, but they would say, oh, I hadn't heard that before.
Exactly.
So tell us about the creation of the Women's March platform and what you're going to do with that now.
One of the things that we analyzed as women of color from the 2016 elections, and the reason why we believe that we lost in really important places like Wisconsin and Michigan, and really states where we should have won, is we felt that the Democratic Party, or Democrats in general, were too busy focusing on vote for us because we're not them. Vote for us because they're racist. Vote for us because they're the basket of deplorables. And that's not really how people are moved. And I think about how I'm moved. I'm moved by things I care about. I'm moved by communities that I love. I'm moved by the idea that I have a role to play in protecting the most marginalized people. So what we wanted to bring forth to the people attending the Women's March, this is not just about we're here because we're anti-Trump. Trump is just the manifestation of the unfortunate diseases that have plagued this nation for a very long time. We wanted people to come and feel like they were marching for something, that we too have values and principles that we stand for. So Carmen Perez and I went on a mission to find about 27 of the most brilliant women and women identifying folks in the country and say to them, we want to put together a platform that speaks to everyone. And being able to read a platform and people to say, well, you know what? Never really thought about this, but it makes sense to me, but I do really care about these three issues, and this really brings me to the table. I'm coming for trans women or for Muslim women. I want to come to the table because I believe that immigrants in our country deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. I'm coming to the table because women deserve equal pay. Women's bodies should be their choices, and government shouldn't be legislating them. We're anti-war and pro-diplomacy and pro-peace. And so all we put forth was the brilliance of women coming together and saying, this is what we believe in. And when we march for these things. We're not marching against one person. We're marching for these things and against all these bad things like racism and sexism and misogyny. And I remember reading an article maybe 2 weeks before the Women's March last year that said that this was the boldest, most intersectional platform that has ever come out of any march historically. And that was one of the moments where I was the most proud.
Great. And wonderful. And so now here we are in 2018. A year that I think many of us, yourself and myself included, is going to be a year of transformational political change. What is the Women's March doing now in this moment? Does the platform play a role in setting out a vision for the next wave of candidates who is going to come all across the country? What's 2018 look like for you?
So on January 21st of 2017, here we are. We organized the largest single-day protest in U.S. history, and we could have went home. And that could have been enough. That's a pretty impressive thing to put on your resume, and you can just say, I did that, and walk away. But we had so much access to human capital, and we didn't just want to drop it on January 21st. And we wanted to find ways to continue to engage these folks that marched with us, that stood with us, that felt that kind of inspiration that we all felt on that day. And we've been able to engage people along the year in the first 10 actions in the first 90 days after the Women's March, getting people to town halls, writing letters to their members of Congress. And we were doing a lot of basic type organizing because a lot of these folks, this was new for them. And it was really great to be able to collect even more folks along the way that said, man, I didn't go to the Women's March, but watched it on TV and it was amazing. I want to connect to this organization. Moving forward, just being really a group that attracts a lot of kind of media attention. We went up against the NRA. The NRA put out a video with actual clips of the Women's March and basically calling on, people in this country who are NRA members and said to them, you got to come out to face these people with a, clenched fist of truth, which we know means come to protests in places that are open carry, which we have been met with. And, we could have stayed back and said, let the NRA do what they want. But we were like, no, we're going to fight back and we're going to stand up and we're not afraid. So we were able to, galvanize a whole a group of women that said, wow, like I'm all about this, fierce, bold women leadership. I've never, experienced this in recent times in a way that's so bold. And then we went to organizing the largest women's convention in 40 years. The last one was in 1977 in Houston, Texas. And ever since then, there's been issue-based, conventions, but an actual women's convention, we were the first in 40 years. And it was amazing and beautiful and inspirational. And people will tell you, even the skeptics that came said, wow, like we've never been in a place that was so organized and was so intentional about the people we put forth. Our speakers were over 65% women of color, and putting forth the most directly impacted communities, but also giving instructions to folks. And then we went from there, continuing to kind of build our credibility to our base, basically saying, we know what we're doing, trust us on this, and having to come back over and over to prove that we know what we're doing. And here we are in 2018, and what we're doing now is basically taking the momentum that we continued since January 21st of last year and using it to build political power in 2018. Marching is cool. It's great. You put your frustrations out there, you feel good, and you get on a high for a day. But really, what is it that you do the day after the march, and the weeks after the march, the months after? So right now, we have launched Power to the Polls, and it will be launched on our 1-year anniversary on January 21st, 2018. And we are doing a national tour, going to communities where this work is already happening. We are not the first people to do voter registration or voter engagement work. There are local communities, including communities of color, that this is what they do all day long. But being able to come to a local community, give them our kind of platform and say, follow us, MSNBC, follow us, CNN. Here are the people that are going to win in the states like Arizona and Florida and in Michigan and Nevada. And the idea is looking at voter suppression laws in states where there is voter suppression. We really have to pull out 1.5 million or register an additional 1.5 million, and this is across the movement with our partners, in order to look at about 1.5 million people who are literally have obstacles to go to the polls, as we hope to bring in electeds and people who will help us address voter suppression laws, because we might not be able to beat the voter suppression system in 2018. And putting in people who are aligning with our values and principles. I think one of the things that doesn't resonate with communities, and especially not with millennials or communities of color, is this idea of like, but the lesser of two evils. Like, we know who has to win because this, and no, what about allowing people during the primaries to put their souls into people that they believe in or people who believe in their cause, and then understanding that in November we don't have a choice and we know who we need to elect in office. But what if we were able to win primaries where real progressives and women and folks that have been part of the movement actually get to win? So that's really where our focus is. It's power to the polls, it's traveling the country, it's mobilizing people, and it's telling people we're going to win confidently. In 2018, I am pretty positive that we're going to have such big wins. And not only, Heather, are we going to have big wins, but I'm pretty positive that we're going to make history. We're going to have governorships given to representatives of communities that have been so marginalized in our country, and we're going to sit back and say we were alive in 2018 when we have the first Native governor in a place like Idaho, or the first Muslim governor in Michigan, or the first Black woman governor in Georgia. And I want that to be a story that I tell my grandkids 40 years from now.
It's an inspiring vision, and I couldn't agree more. Let's go back for a second to the book. And the book is now on sale. The book is something that's sort of a beautiful commemoration that people who went to the march or, were alive when the march happened and saw it on television can own. And there are a lot of stories and testimonials in the book from people you might not expect. Yeah. So what's something... what's one of the chapters that's maybe surprising to you or surprising to readers?
The book is, for me, a historical artifact. And if you want to own a piece of history, you will buy Together We Rise. And it is full of, number one, the story directly from the organizers of the Women's March. So this is not a secondhand. This is us telling you exactly what happened. And you know this from history, Heather. Women's voices have always been erased, and even in light of the commemoration of Dr. King, there was the Ella Bakers and the Coretta Scott Kings and the Rosa Parks, and we are a new generation of women that says that our revolution will be written, it will be televised, it will be tweeted, it will be Facebooked. I mean, it will be written in our voices. And it also includes essays from celebrities and prominent activists and thought leaders in this country and prominent leaders within different communities. And one of the essays in the book is written by my mentor, by a woman by the name of Sister Aisha Al-Adawiya. She works at the Schomburg Center. She's a black Muslim woman who is older and has been around since the days of the Civil Rights Movement, knew Coretta Scott King and knew Dr. Betty Shabazz and Malcolm X. And she wrote a piece in there about Sankofa, about us not only thinking that we're just running in, this new movement, that we're creating anything new, but in fact reaching back for us to move forward. And she always reminds us of the shoulders of the people that we stand on. So what I love about that particular essay that is called Sankofa and how we move forward is that anyone who's in this movement right now needs to understand that there's nothing that you are inventing here, that you are continuing a legacy of people who sacrificed for us to be able to even do this work. So as a Muslim woman, someone like Sister Aisha sacrificed for me to be able to stand here and say I'm unapologetically Muslim. And she is a black Muslim woman in 2018 and has seen a lot in her life. And her words are so inspirational. And if someone like her who's seen so much pain and trauma and was kind of in the midst of a movement, and here she is still alive during kind of the re-emergence of a civil rights movement in this moment, I think anyone who's feeling still a little despair is going to feel a lot of hope reading Sister Aisha.
That's wonderful. Before the program, we were talking about your family and your children, and you were just bringing into the room the lions and lionesses of the civil rights movement and all that went into what is now sort of universally praised across the ideological spectrum, and how much sacrifice and how much pain and how much blood and sweat went into it. And you were talking about watching the movie Selma with your kids. I just thought that was a beautiful story. Yeah. So could you share that with our viewers?
I think what people often see, they see us on national television sharing our work and stories, or they might see us on a cover of a magazine, and people think this work is glamorous. And unfortunately, it's not. And nobody wants to be anyone on the front lines of the movement, and you especially don't want to be a woman of color, and definitely not a Palestinian Muslim American woman in hijab. And I've received, since the Women's March on Washington, some of the most vicious attacks that I honestly didn't expect. I expect people to disagree with me 100%, and that's welcomed, and even vigorous disagreement, which is cool. But threats to my life and to my children, defamation of my character. And it's really been hard. And what people often forget is we are mothers. Many of us in the movement, Tamika Mallory's a mother, Bob Land is a mother, I'm a mother. Many of the women we organize with are parents. And to have to sit and explain to your children why someone or some people want to create a monster out of your mom who you love dearly, who does your laundry and cooks dinner for you. And I remember taking my kids to watch Selma. And my kids resonated with a lot of imagery in Selma. And obviously, those who marched in Selma and were part of that movement at that time sacrificed much more than we are sacrificing right now. But when my kids, get to see me engaging in acts of civil disobedience, when they watched, different elements of, being in our living room and watching my organizer friends come home and gather around the table, and here we're talking about this next action that we're doing, and my kids are in the same room and seeing Dr. Martin Luther King in those, Diane Nash and others, and gathering in people's homes, and women are cooking for them. And so there's a lot of imagery that resonated with my kids, and the slanders and the threats that they received, sometimes via phone, or letters that folks in the civil rights movement were getting from oppositional figures, including the FBI, who were almost asking Dr. Martin Luther King to kill himself, basically. And I think that helped me to have a conversation with my kids that I do this because I love my children, and I want them to live in a country that respects them and loves them, and by extension respects and loves all children. But it comes with risks. And I explained to my children that if this was easy and this was cool, everybody would be doing it. In fact, we wouldn't be having to fight for our rights because it would be inevitable. We would all have our rights. And so that's the movies and those types of narratives coming out, kind of going back and bringing forth the stories in a visual way for my children has actually helped therapeutically for children who are experiencing trauma, who worry about the safety of their parents and their mom in particular, in my case. And, like sometimes my kids, are like very edgy, they'll text me like, where are you? Who's with you? And I don't think kids should really be worrying about where their mom is, at, especially not at 6 o'clock on, on a Tuesday night. But our kids struggle with us, and I have security detail, and and I don't always bring my kids to public things anymore because I don't want people to make connections in that way, and that hurts my heart because I want my children to participate in my life. But unfortunately, we're in a moment where maybe temporarily that can't happen.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Linda. This is a moment right now when so many women are finding their voices. It is unbelievable. It is a moment where women are finding their voices through the Me Too movement, through the movement to move into politics. You have record number of women saying, all right, fine. I never thought politics was something I was going to have to do personally, but it's clear that the system is broken and that the people who are currently in power do not have my community, my children, the future of our planet's interests at heart. And so take me into maybe in Detroit, where you had thousands of women, or what's going to happen in Nevada, where you're going to have, on the anniversary of the Women's March of 2017, you're going to have more women's marches all across the country, and I think the main one is going to be in Nevada. What does it feel like to be right now a woman finding her voice? Who are the women who are drawn to the Women's March and are doing things that they've never done before? Tell me a little bit about those women and what it feels like.
What's really interesting is that I've been traveling the country for the past year. I've been to rural Indiana. I've been to, Kentucky, parts of Florida, Texas, Michigan, you name it, I've been there. And believe it or not, the people who come out for me and want to be in space with me, oftentimes are majority either really young people, kind of millennial age or even younger, or white women. And it's one of the reasons why the opposition is really shook up, because it's like, why would white women want to hear from a Muslim American woman? And what do you have that they're attracted to? And I think what women in general are attracted to with us is that we believe in our power. We are powerful people, and the Women's March allows you to feel in your individual power. So oftentimes we are taught that you have to be part of an institution, or you have to have some sort of stature or a particular degree. And what we did in the Women's March, as I said earlier, bakers and school teachers and social workers and stay-at-home moms, everybody had a role to play. And it showed that you didn't have to be a seasoned organizer to be part of the movement. So these women are finally saying, wow, like, even I can be part of a movement, even I can be an activist, even I can organize a local huddle in my community, even I can put together a town hall meeting. Yes, you can, absolutely. And that's what the Women's March has instilled in many people around the country. And I think this moment, and I always think back to January 20th on that very dreadful day on the inauguration, I thought to myself, what if there wasn't a Women's March on January 21st? Honestly, I don't know where we would be as a country if we did not have that immediate moment after such a dreadful day for us to say, wake up, we're here, we're united, we know what we need to do, let's all get on the same page and let's fight together. I don't believe we would have had the Me Too's and the Time's Up and the 2,000 women saying I'm running for office, or watching the wins that we saw in Virginia and New Jersey and in Alabama. I mean, if you can win in Alabama, for God's sakes, you can win anywhere. So I think that we are in this new moment, and I'm very proud to have been part of a large group of women, not just those who organize the DC March, but also those who organize across the country and across the world, who have reminded women that you are powerful. And then we are even more powerful when we organize together. And a lot of these movements are giving people courage, and we need courage in this moment. And courage we all have it in us. It's actually not something you find. Like, for me, courage is not something that is exterior to us. Courage is in you, but there has to be a moment where it's like unleashed. And I think this year it has unleashed a lot of courage amongst many groups of people, including women.
Great, Linda. I actually have been thinking about this idea of courage, and if there is one word that I think defines what we need right now, what should unite all of us who believe in a better America and a better world, is that we need courage, and we need our elected officials to have courage, to stand up for those who are being targeted, those who are the most vulnerable, and that is something that we sense immediately when a leader has or doesn't have courage.
Absolutely.
So tell us about how you started. When did you first find your courage? How did you become an activist?
I was an aspiring high school English teacher. I watched Dangerous Minds with Michelle Pfeiffer, and I was like, I'm going to be Michelle Pfeiffer. I want to go into inner city schools. I want to work with young people of color and let them find their voice through literature. That was really my passion. And 9/11 happened in New York City. I was 21 years old. Here I was, a Muslim American, never really thought about it much. I was like, I'm just Muslim, like other people are other things. It was never really something that was at the forefront of my mind. And then here comes a very dreadful day, a very tragic day in my own city where I was born. And walking home that day from my college campus in Brooklyn and watching, seeing my local community, the stores were closed down. And I was like, why are the stores closed down? At the moment, I hadn't known exactly what had happened because there was no Twitter at that time. There was no Facebook. There was no cell phone service. And then at the moment when I realized eventually what had happened, and all of a sudden I went from being just an ordinary Muslim girl born and raised in Brooklyn to being affiliated or attached to or being a suspect in a very tragic event that killed millions of my fellow Americans, in particular fellow New Yorkers, my life and my perspective changed literally within like a matter of minutes. And I remember a few weeks after 9/11 happened, being at the mosque, and women came crying to the mosque saying that someone came to my home and took my husband, and there were like a few of them. And I was like, what do you mean somebody just came to your house and took your husband? This doesn't make any sense to me. And in fact, it did happen. And there were raids on the communities that I came from, that I lived in, that I loved. And I was just very radicalized at that moment. And I said, this is not right. Why should our communities be terrorized for something that had nothing to do with us, nothing to do with these people? So then I became a translator, and I started translating for these women. I started helping, and volunteering to find services for them as someone who's bilingual, and thought it was like a little side thing that I was doing. And then eventually has become my full time and became my life to defend a community, defend my own family, defend my children, defend myself, to be able to worship freely in this country. So that's my entry point into this work, was 9/11. And it's been still a connection for me, even 16 years later.
And how did you get your analysis and your sense of solidarity around issues of racial justice? Because that's not a given, right? I mean, Muslim Americans have been, lumped in with other degraded identities, but it's not a given that there's the same issues that affect, a young African American man in the Bronx and, your family and community in Brooklyn. So where did that come from? And then how did you use that, the advent of that sort of connection that you made when you really became a leader for racial justice in a very intersectional way in New York, to cross those bridges in the Women's March context?
Believe it or not, I started reflecting on my own life. I went to John Jay High School in Brooklyn, and my school was, at the time in the 90s, there was a lot of gang activity in New York City. And my school was where you walked in the morning, you were stopped, and everybody was stopped and frisked. But remember that my school was about 90% African American, and those were my friends, and those are the people. So for me, I thought this was just how it was. I didn't understand this idea of the school to prison pipeline. We had NYPD officers walking the halls of John Jay High School before there were school safety officers. There was ever such a thing as school safety officers. So I started reflecting after watching, these young people in my community coming and people saying that law enforcement's coming to their home and starting to understand, oh, this is religious profiling, and then saying, wait a minute, well, I went to a school where there were police officers arresting black kids in my school, and I started just connecting the dots in this really weird reading on my own, just going online and being like, what's going on in the world? And then I started just venturing out. So I became part of a nonprofit organization, and I started seeking out coalitions and work. And in this one, I'd talk to this organizer. They would say, hey, you should come to this, you should come to that. And the place that it really solidified and kind of clicked for me was around racial and religious profiling by the New York Police Department. And really connecting stop and frisk specifically as a discriminatory policy to the unwarranted surveillance of Muslims by the New York Police Department. And we built the coalition around that here in New York City. In fact, not only did we build a coalition, we won very major landmark civil rights legislation and police reform legislation in New York City. And ever since then, I will never work on any issue without looking at it through a racial justice standpoint. Even as a Muslim American, I come from a very diverse community, and a third of Muslims are African American. So for me, I don't consider myself also to be an ally in this work. You know, for me as a Muslim, when I march against stop and frisk or against the killing of unarmed black people, I actually truly believe that I first and foremost march for my black Muslim sisters and brothers, and by extension, all black people in America. But racial justice came in for me on everything. Like I was like, okay, immigration. Who's left out of this conversation? Black immigrants, right? When you think about reproductive rights, who are the most directly impacted? Women of color, black women. When you think about issues of equal pay, again, the inequality even amongst the women who are fighting for equal pay, that there needs to be even a racial justice analysis through that as well. And then I also realized, and as I built very deep relationships with organizers here in New York City and then nationally, we can't win alone. Black people can't win alone. White people can't win alone. The Muslims aren't going to win alone. The undocumented folks are not going to win alone. And we got to bring it together. And in the beginning, people thought we were crazy, and which is why we wanted to make it so visible at the Women's March. And you'll read more about it in the book. When we did the unity principles, people said to us, here we go again. These women, mishmash, they're going to throw a whole bunch of issues together. You are not focused. You know, how are you going to fight for all these issues? It's very easily distracting. We were like, no, actually, it's not distracting at all. We are intersectional human beings. We don't live single issue lives. So why would we force people to prioritize what we think is important to them? Why don't we allow communities to prioritize what is the thing that most directly impacts them? So for me, I was doing intersectional organizing before people were calling it intersectionality. Obviously, the term has been out for a long time by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, but the implementation of it in the movement has come out in recent times. We hear that buzzword. But for me, I've realized, at least in the past 11 years, maybe 5 or 6 years into my organizing work, when I finally woke up and said, no, this is not going to work. We got to organize together. And also the idea of, like, when people they say to me, like, Linda, how do you connect criminal justice to reproductive rights? I don't understand how you connect, reproductive rights to immigration. Like these things don't connect, and everything connects. Literally, I can connect the dots: environmental justice to racial justice, and economic justice to immigration. And like it's very easily, and we have created a web now that's very clear. And obviously, Demos has done that in a really profound way that is easily digestible for people. And now people are starting to get it, and that's why you will see, groups like Sierra Club and NRDC and 350.org at a DACA rally. And that never happened before. That's a fact of the matter. And I mean, I speak from personal experience that I have never seen environmental justice groups show up in immigrant rights spaces. And even in racial justice spaces, finding people the reproductive rights movement was nowhere to be found in the criminal justice system. And here we are, women having access to reproductive, justice and rights as incarcerated women. Like there is a lot of opportunities, but there was, for some reason, it wasn't happening. And I think that the Women's March, one of the things that we do bring to the table, and we're not perfect, is somehow we were able to bring people to the table. And if we're just the table convener, and that's all we are, I'm good with that.
It's an amazing, amazing accomplishment. So talk to me about the state of the resistance. How's it going? I have my own opinions. But in many ways, exactly as you said, Linda, having the 21st, the day after that sparsely attended, cold, bleak, dishonest inauguration and inaugural address, to have a way for people to come, put their bodies on the line, show by moving. I mean, buses and trains and planes, people just felt like they had to be. Either it was down in their town square or it was all the way in Washington, D.C. It set the stage for what came right after, which was the Muslim ban, and here in New York, the protests where people went straight to the airport. There was a sense of, we can move, we can be powerful, we can show that he still did not win the popular vote, that this country is different than the values that are now being espoused from the White House. It really, in many ways, sparked this resistance moment that we are still in, where ordinary people have their Congress member on speed dial and are setting up huddles and thinking that they would do things to protect our democracy and to act out our democracy that they never thought. And now, a year after the inauguration, what do you think is the state of the resistance? What are we doing well, and what do we still need to do better?
There's definitely been consistent momentum since January 21st of last year. I mean, again, you know, a week after, here we are totally exhausted from the Women's March, and the Muslim ban comes. And, you know, as a Muslim, and again, very personal for me, I was so moved to see just people in the hundreds show up at airports all around the country, and that was very beautiful. And it shows the decentralization of the movement. Literally, that was a tweet. Everyone was like, get your butts to the airports. Boom, people showed up at the airports. And ever since then, People's Climate March, March for Truth, March for Black Women, March for Racial Justice, Tax March, this, really just consistent opportunities for visibility, the Dreamers and direct action, civil disobedience. And also, you know, at the end, we didn't win at the end, but watching us, you know, fight back against healthcare and winning twice until, unfortunately, they knew they weren't going to be able to beat us that way. So they folded it into the tax bill, which is how we lost recently. But watching the pushback on, you know, the transgender ban in the military. I mean, it literally everything that has come forth from this administration, there has been some sort of response to it. But it doesn't mean that the resistance is perfect. And the resistance is not perfect, and it will never be perfect. And resistance is messy because you're organizing with people who, even if we were just organizing from the center all the way to the extreme radical left, that is a huge spectrum of people that you're trying to organize. And when I say to people all the time is that we're not all going to have the same tactics and strategies, which is what we're seeing manifest in the resistance now. Some people want to engage just in civil disobedience. Others just want to march. Others want to engage in lobbying and advocacy. People want to focus just on electoral strategy. My thing in the movement is that that's the messy part. Who gets to do what? And what I say to people, as long as we are all on the same page for the end result, it doesn't really matter how we get there. And I think that's the understanding we're not yet clear on, right? That we're don't critique me for engaging in electoral politics. That is something that you may not believe in as a tool. I believe in it as a tool. But maybe you can continue to do the visible organizing and the direct action and the civil disobedience. And this year I'm going to focus on electoral organizing. So the resistance is strong. It's going to be a little dysfunctional sometimes. There are going to be organizations that don't play nice with one another. There are going to be times where leaders may disagree on a particular policy. We may not all get to the last page. Sometimes there's going to be negotiations and compromises that people don't think we should make. Me personally, I'm on the page right now that this is actually a moment where we might not have to compromise. Just go all in this time because we're playing on two extremes. And I think that's actually good for us in the resistance. And what I mean by that is we're so polarized as a nation right now, it's actually easier to say, are you with us or with them? And for those that are in the center who are not sure or are worried. So for example, I'll give you a visual example. We went to do a recent Women's March supported some local groups and United We Dream out in LA to do a march outside of Senator Feinstein's office. In support of the Dreamers, telling her, look, if the DREAM Act is not in the final bill, we want you to be courageous and stand with us, which I know she will. And it was really interesting. Here we were, a couple of hundred people standing with the Dreamers who went inside to meet in Senator Feinstein's office. And then across the street, there was a counter-protest. And it was a counter-protest that was pretty significant. I mean, it was like a 4 o'clock on like a Wednesday. About 40 people, with... you already know with Make America Great Again, and they were holding up signs, illegals, we don't want this, we don't want illegals in this country. And it was actually an important moment, right, when you have the media there, and to kind of portray to the American people, okay, are you on this side with the people who are talking about justice and dignity and respect and protecting young people, or are you on this side with the people who are calling human beings illegal and saying, go back to where you came from, we don't want you here, you don't belong here. So I think we're in a moment where people really got to get off the sidelines. And if you don't get off the sidelines, in my personal opinion, and we've heard this quote many times before, if you don't pick a side and you stay on the fence, you're on the side of the oppressors. And I hope that people join and understand that we're not going to always agree. And that's what I always tell people when I debate people online. I say the point here is not for you to agree with everything that I say. In fact, we need to allow space for people to disagree. And we're never going to agree. I'm not going to agree with Republicans. They won't agree with me. I'm not going to agree with liberals. As a progressive, I might not agree with people who I consider to be neoliberals. But guess what? We probably can all agree that we all deserve to have respectful debates and to be treated with dignity and respect. And if we can do that, God bless America. Because people are expecting this idea in the resistance that unity is uniformity. And I never believe that. Unity is not uniformity. Unity is all of us understanding that the end game here is that all marginalized communities are protected, and when all marginalized communities are protected, we all live prosperous, full, productive lives in this country. How we get there, I don't care.
So, Linda, as part of those many different marginalized groups you just alluded to, there is a demographic that voted majority for Donald Trump, even though someone from their demographic was on the opposing ticket. White women, 53%, according to exit polls, voted for Donald Trump. Continue to vote for Republicans whose agenda, whether it's their economic agenda, which keeps millions of women in poverty without a safety net or without a voice at work, or Republicans whose agenda in terms of reproductive rights and family leave and child care has no support for the kinds of lives that women deserve to live. And yet, white women, not Latina women, not African American women, not Native American women, white women are still supporting a party that we might say, it's not supporting you. And there are so many white women whose lives are transformed by the Women's March and who see the Women's March as their home. What do you say to them? What do you say to them to say to their sisters who may not have marched, but are, otherwise, share their culture and their beliefs?
I say to them that it may not feel like this, but we're fighting for them too. And we believe in their potential to do the right thing. And I know that they continue oftentimes to disappoint, and including to disappoint their white sisters. I mean, the ones that, the 49% or the 47% who don't vote for Republicans. But what I ask people to do, and I do this myself, I'm not actually loyal to any political party. And I have been known as a big critic of the Democratic Party for a long time. And I say to people, vote your values and your principles. And also don't assume what this movement is about. And the reason why I say that is in the last year, we got into a big controversy about pro-abortion, pro-life, can pro-life women come and be a part of this movement? And what I said to people is that we never said we were a pro-abortion movement. That wasn't the language that we used. We were very intentional about the language. We are pro-choice. We are a movement that believes that a woman should have the agency to choose whatever it is that she feels is right for her and her family and her body. So if a woman chooses to keep her baby, we respect her. If you are a woman who chooses to have an abortion for many, many reasons, this is not an easy decision that women have to make. We respect you too. So I think this idea of pinning up women against each other, pro-life versus pro-abortion, I'm pro-choice. And I believe in women's agencies to make any choices, whether it be about their bodies, about their jobs, about their careers, about their children. Women should be able to choose. And that framing is important because it opens up an opportunity for people to see themselves, okay, maybe this is not what I thought it was. We're not a bra-burning, man-hating movement, which is another critique. We unfortunately have a long history of white liberal feminism in this country who have kept women of color out, who have kept men out. It's very man-hating. We're not. I mean, we have sons, we have fathers and uncles and brothers who need to be a part of these conversations. And many moms in the movement, and particularly black mothers and women of color, they have children who may be incarcerated or women who could be subject to police violence or even gun violence. And those women want their families to be protected too, and it's not just about us. So I say to those women, wake up, listen to us, hear us. Don't listen for responding to us, listen to see where we're coming from. And we want a quality education for our children. We want access to health care for everyone. We want you to be able to walk through your streets safely. We want you to be able to, get a job based on your qualifications and your credentials and be paid for your qualifications and your credentials that you have. So I still have hope. And one of the things that in the Women's March that we're doing right now, we have a woman named Cassidy, a woman named Sophie in the Women's March, and a woman by the name of Rhiannon out in Ohio, who's a black woman, leading an effort called Confronting White Womanhood. Cassidy and Sophie are both white, and another young woman by the name of Heather Marie, who did a workshop actually at the Women's Convention called Confronting White Womanhood. Originally, people thought it was really controversial. They were like, here we go again. You guys want to be all spicy about stuff and dividing, women between white versus women of color. So we took the risk, and these young women put this beautiful, inspirational, well thought out kind of workshop together, and we put it in a room. And, we were like, I bet you no one's going to go. Because, a lot of the women that came to the Women's March convention were white. We have a photo that is one of the most remarkable photos I've ever seen from the convention, where the line, after the room was already filled up, hundreds of women already went in there, people sitting on the floor, sitting up against the wall. There was a line outside the room of people who wanted to get into that workshop that we had to repeat it the next day and find a room for it because more women who couldn't participate wanted to participate. So we do know that there are white women in this country that are starting to analyze themselves and saying, wait a minute, I'm not a bad person, but I understand that being white, somehow, unintentionally, I have been complicit in some of the suffering that has happened around me to people of color. And they want to confront it, they want to analyze it, they want to dissect it, and then they want to know how to overcome it so they can be true allies and accomplices in this work. And that's been moving for me. People who are willing to say, I have something to learn. There's an opportunity for me here. And for us not to shut them out. And that's the other thing that happens sometimes in the progressive left that really personally bothers me. We are immediately see someone that says something that we don't like, and immediately we engage in call-out culture. We take them and we tear them to shreds. Instead of saying, wait a minute, I heard you say this and this is how it made me feel, but what did you really mean by that? Mm-hmm. Or wait a minute, are you ready to listen to my feedback? And for someone to say, you know what, I was wrong. Mm-hmm. You know what, I learned something. So we don't give people that opportunity. And I think this Confronting White Womanhood workshop that we'll be taking with us around the country as part of Power to the Polls is going to be a moment for white women to really sit, reflect, and really come out strong in 2018. So I was disappointed, but I still got hope.
Well, I was on C-SPAN now almost 2 years ago, actually, when a man called in from North Carolina and said exactly that, said, I'm prejudiced. I'm a white male and I'm prejudiced. And he went on to talk about things, these sort of stereotypes. Mm-hmm. But then he ended by saying something that I think, and we know because the video went viral and so it so clearly touched a nerve. He said, I want to be a better American. What can I do to change? And I completely agree with you, Linda, that it is so important that those of us who now have this huge megaphone use it to invite people in, to recognize that the way that some of the loudest people on the right wing have created this story of fear that people like you and me are hurting America, that we are threatening to their families, that is a lie, and it's one of the oldest lies of the founding of our country, and that kind of fear has been manipulated and brought us Donald Trump, who is hurting this country, this planet, our standing in the world in so many ways, in a way that now, even now, actually, millions of white Americans are having second thoughts.
And I've been really vulnerable in the spaces that I've been in, especially for in communities where I go, where they may never have had a conversation with a Muslim woman like me. And being able to say to people, ask me anything. Yeah. There is nothing that you can ask me that's going to hurt my feelings. And you want to ask me about Sharia law because you hear it out of the right wing and it scares you. Ask me about it. You want to ask me how can I be a feminist and dress modestly and wear hijab? Ask me and I'll tell you why. You want to ask me, why this? What about this and this is happening in this country and I don't understand and why do Muslims do that? And literally allowing people to feel like they can have an honest conversation with me, people have been moved. I remember going to the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and I was doing a keynote kind of lecture series. And I get there, and the professors are running around the school being like, oh my God, kids are coming to protest. And I'm like, it's really not that serious. Like, I've been there, done that, it's okay. Yeah. And they were really shook up about it. And I was like, who is it? And they were like, oh, the local college Republicans on the campus, whatever. And it was like, some conservative kids, whatever. I was like, it's fine. I mean, they're more than welcome to come. And they come to this event, rooms packed in an auditorium. They come in wearing literally Trump pen shirts, lined up. They sat. The professors were sitting in front of them, behind them. And really when I saw them, I was like, this is going to be fine. And I get up there and I do my usual. And I think they had an assumption of what I was going to say and who I was and how I was going to present myself. And then at the end of the event, we all went outside into the open area, outside of the auditorium. And it was really some dramatic moment where I caught an eye with one of the kids that came. In fact, before that, I got a standing ovation. And the kids felt compelled because everybody else stood up to stand up, which is fine. I still didn't think much of it. I was like, they got pressured in it because everyone else did it. So when we were outside, I caught an eye with one of the kids. And he looked at me, and then I kind of smiled a little bit to see what kind of reaction I was going to get. And then he literally started walking towards me. And then the crowd parted. And, I put out my hands to him, and he said his name, and I shared my name with him. And I was like, I really appreciate that you came today. And I said, I was like, people told me you were going to protest. Like, what happened? He was like, look, I didn't agree with everything that you said. He's like, but there was some stuff I actually agreed with. I said, so what made you come to that? And he said, you know what? And this is the most profound thing. I was moved by him saying this. He said, like 19-year-old white kid. He said, I chose to give you a chance. And I said to myself, wow, here you are, a 19-year-old college student. And that's what I ask people all the time in this work that we're doing in this moment, whether you feel like you're on my side or not my side, or if you support the Women's March or you don't support, give people a chance. And if after you give us a chance, you still don't agree with us and you still don't think we're the right group, or you still don't think that, you can organize with me, or you can still come to the same table that I come, even though we may differ on a particular foreign policy issue or on a particular political issue or a social issue, I think giving people a chance, transformative things happen. And that day when I walked away from that kid and I said, wow, even for myself, giving people a chance, like, it's such a simple thing that we could do in this moment.
Okay. Thank you, Linda. So Together We Rise, the commemoration, the behind the scenes, oh, how we wish we had these for the other big marches and the other big moments in social justice history. It's really an incredible treasure to have this book. And it's coming out right now on the eve of the 1-year anniversary. So just quickly, we have about 30 seconds left. Tell us what's going to happen this weekend for us now, the weekend of the 1-year anniversary of the Women's March.
The Women's March is commemorating the largest single-day protest in American history by launching and kicking off a national campaign called Power to the Polls, which will be a national tour engaging and registering voters across the country, because we will win in 2018, and the headlines will be Women Led Us to Victory. And Together We Rise is a book that is going to share with all of us the behind the scenes of the march, but it's one of the most inspirational physical things you can hold in your hand, with beautiful photography and the faces of the people who marched in every corner of this world. And you want to have it and hold it for decades to come to show your great-grandchildren.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Linda.
Thank you.
If you'd like to view other Afterwards programs,